From the depths of a Montana wilderness comes a tale that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about one of nature's most misunderstood creatures. What started as a dangerous prank turned into an extraordinary moment that changed not just one life, but an entire community. This is the incredible true story of a young girl, a rescued bear, and an unexpected friendship that defied all odds. Nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, the small town of Cedar Ridge had always been a place where wilderness and civilization danced a delicate ballet. Among its 3,000 residents, most knew each other by name, and news traveled faster than the brisk mountain winds that swept through its streets. But nothing had prepared this tight-knit community for the extraordinary events that would unfold at the Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary. The sanctuary itself was a crown jewel of Cedar Ridge, sprawling across 50 acres of pristine Montana wilderness. Dense pine forests created a natural barrier between the facility and the outside world, while a crystal-clear creek meandered through the property, its gentle burble a constant reminder of nature's presence. But it was what lay within the sanctuary's bounds that truly captured the imagination of visitors and locals alike. Among the various rescued animals that called Pine Valley home, none commanded more attention or fear than Atlas, a massive male bear with unusual reddish-brown fur that seemed to shimmer like copper in the sunlight. His story was one of both tragedy and triumph. Rescued as a cub from illegal captivity, he had grown into a magnificent creature that inspired both awe and trepidation in equal measure. Atlas's enclosure was a masterpiece of natural design, featuring a cave-like den nestled into a hillside, surrounded by native vegetation and a small pond. From the elevated observation deck, visitors could safely watch him go about his daily routines, fishing in his pond, foraging through enrichment puzzles created by the sanctuary staff, or simply lounging in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the pine canopy. Dr. Rachel Martinez, the sanctuary's director, had dedicated years to creating a facility that not only rehabilitated wildlife, but also educated the public about conservation. Her vision had transformed Pine Valley from a modest rescue center into a state-of-the-art facility that attracted visitors from across the country. The rustic lodge-style visitor center housed interactive exhibits, while the educational wing hosted regular workshops and school groups. But despite Dr. Martinez's efforts to promote understanding and respect for wildlife, old fears and misconceptions still ran deep in Cedar Ridge. Atlas, in particular, had become something of a local legend. Some claimed he was twice the size of a normal bear. Others swore they'd heard his roars echoing through the valley on quiet nights. Parents warned their children to stay away from the sanctuary's fences, and local hunting guides used his story to caution about the dangers of the wild. What few people knew was that Atlas possessed a gentleness that contradicted his fearsome reputation. Dr. Martinez and her staff had observed behaviors in him that challenged everything they thought they knew about rehabilitated bears. He showed an unusual interest in human activity, not with aggression, but with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. He would often sit near the observation deck during educational presentations, as if listening to the guides explain his species' role in the ecosystem. The sanctuary had recently expanded its educational program, offering summer workshops for local teenagers interested in wildlife conservation. These sessions were meant to foster understanding and respect for nature, but they also inadvertently created opportunities for the kind of mischief that often accompanies young minds with too much time on their hands. It was during one of these workshops that 14-year-old Sophie Anderson first encountered Atlas. Unlike many of her peers who signed up for the program out of genuine interest, Sophie had been nudged into attending by her parents, who hoped it would help her connect with other kids her age. New to Cedar Ridge, having moved from Seattle just months earlier, Sophie struggled to find her place in the close-knit community. The workshop group was small but diverse. Madison Thompson, Maddie to her friends, was the unofficial leader, a charismatic local girl whose family had lived in Cedar Ridge for generations. Olivia Chen brought a quiet intelligence to the group, while Katie Brooks's enthusiastic energy kept everyone entertained. Together, they formed a tight-knit circle that Sophie desperately wanted to join. As summer progressed, the girls spent more time at the sanctuary learning about wildlife rehabilitation and conservation. But beneath the surface of their educational activities, a current of teenage restlessness began to stir. The presence of Atlas, with all his mysterious allure and fearsome reputation, proved an irresistible temptation for young minds seeking adventure. The sanctuary's layout, while designed for safety and education, created unique spaces where visitors could feel remarkably close to the wildlife. The observation deck overlooking Atlas's enclosure became a particular favorite spot for the girls during breaks between sessions. They would gather there, sharing snacks and secrets, all while the magnificent bear went about his daily routine below them. Little did anyone suspect that this peaceful scene would soon become the stage for an event that would challenge everything the community thought they knew about the relationship between humans and wildlife. The lines between fear and understanding, between reckless danger and unexpected grace, were about to blur in ways that would leave an indelible mark on Cedar Ridge and everyone involved. As the summer sun painted the Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, the stage was set for an extraordinary tale of friendship, courage, and the remarkable capacity for understanding between species that would prove that sometimes the most profound connections come from the most unexpected encounters. Sophie Anderson stood at the edge of the observation deck, her hands gripping the wooden railing as she peered down at Atlas's enclosure. The afternoon sun filtered through, the pine branches casting shifting shadows across the sanctuary grounds. Unlike her outgoing peers, who confidently participated in the wildlife workshops, Sophie preferred to hang back, observing both the animals and her fellow students from a safe distance. Her Seattle upbringing hadn't prepared her for the raw wilderness of Montana, and the culture shock of moving to Cedar Ridge still lingered months after their relocation. In the city, her quiet nature and love of reading had been unremarkable. Here, among kids who grew up tracking deer prints and identifying bird calls, she felt like an alien dropped into unfamiliar territory. Maddie Thompson noticed Sophie's solitary figure and approached with her usual confident stride, Olivia Chen and Katie Brooks trailing close behind. Maddie possessed the easy self-assurance of someone who had never questioned their place in the world. Her family's deep roots in Cedar Ridge gave her an authority that even adults seemed to respect. "You're always watching him," Maddie observed, coming to stand beside Sophie. Below them, Atlas moved with surprising grace for his size, investigating an enrichment puzzle Dr. Martinez had placed in his enclosure earlier that morning. "Aren't you tired of just looking? Don't you ever want to get closer?" Sophie shifted, uncomfortably aware of the other girls watching her reaction. "The viewing deck is close enough," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Dr. Martinez says it's important to respect wildlife boundaries." Katie let out a short laugh. "Dr. Martinez says a lot of things, but haven't you noticed how different Atlas is? He's not like other bears. Sometimes I think he understands us better than most people do." Olivia, usually the voice of reason in the group, nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen him watching our workshops. He seems more interested in humans than afraid of them. My dad says that's dangerous, but I'm not so sure." "That's exactly what makes this perfect," Maddie declared, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Atlas isn't some random wild bear. He's practically grown up around humans, and Sophie here needs something extraordinary for her wildlife observation journal." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. The journal was a crucial part of their summer program, and so far, her entries had been painfully basic compared to her peers. While others wrote about helping with rehabilitation procedures or observing complex behaviors, Sophie's notes focused on safe, distant observations. "What do you mean?" Sophie asked, even as alarm bells rang in her mind. She had spent enough time around Maddie to recognize when the older girl was building up to something potentially dangerous. Maddie leaned in closer, her voice dropping to an excited whisper. "Think about it. Everyone in Cedar Ridge talks about Atlas like he's some kind of monster, but we know better. We've spent weeks watching him. He's gentle, intelligent. What if someone could prove it? What if that someone was you?" The suggestion hung in the air like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. Sophie felt the familiar pressure of wanting to belong warring with her natural caution. She glanced at Olivia, hoping the reasonable girl would object, but found only curious anticipation in her expression. "The maintenance access gate," Katie chimed in, warming to Maddie's idea. "Jake from security always forgets to double-check it after the morning feeding."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"And I've seen him skip it at least 3 times this week." Sophie's mouth went dry. "You want me to go into the enclosure? That's insane. It's not just against the rules, it's dangerous." "Only if you believe all the scary stories," Maddie countered. "Besides, we'll be right here watching. At the first sign of trouble, we'll alert Dr. Martinez. Think of the journal entry you could write. A close encounter with Atlas, dissolving the myths of bear behavior. You'd have the most unique observations in the entire program." The mention of the journal struck a nerve. Sophie had always prided herself on her academic achievements, and the wildlife program's relatively poor grades were a constant source of anxiety. A truly unique observation could change everything, not just her standing in the program, but perhaps her place within the group itself. "When?" The word slipped out before Sophie could stop it, and she saw triumph flash across Maddie's face. "Tomorrow morning," Maddie replied quickly, as if afraid Sophie might change her mind. "During the staff meeting. Everyone will be in the visitor center for at least 30 minutes. Atlas is always calmest after his morning feeding. It's perfect timing." As the girls began excitedly planning the details, Sophie turned back to watch. Atlas, the massive bear, had solved the enrichment puzzle and was now lounging near his pond, his reddish-brown fur catching the sunlight. From this distance, he almost looked peaceful, approachable. Almost. That evening, Sophie lay awake in her bed, listening to the distant sounds of wilderness through her open window. The thought of entering Atlas's enclosure sent alternating waves of terror and exhilaration through her body. She thought about calling the whole thing off, but the memory of Maddie's approval, of finally being included in the group's inner circle, proved too powerful to resist. The next morning dawned clear and cool, typical for a Montana summer. Sophie arrived at the sanctuary early, her heart pounding so hard she feared others might hear it. The girls met at their usual spot on the observation deck, watching as the staff gathered for their morning meeting. "Remember," Maddie whispered, eyes bright with excitement, "just a quick entry into the enclosure. Take a few photos with your phone, maybe record some video if you can. Get close enough to show you were really in there, but not so close that you make Atlas nervous." Sophie nodded mutely, her throat too tight for words. She watched as the last staff member disappeared into the visitor center, leaving the sanctuary grounds eerily quiet. The maintenance access gate waited below, innocuous yet forbidden, like a doorway to another world. "Now," Maddie urged, giving Sophie a gentle push toward the stairs. "We'll keep watch. This is your moment, Sophie. Show everyone what you're really made of." As Sophie descended the stairs on shaking legs, she couldn't help but wonder if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, or perhaps discover something extraordinary that would change everything she thought she knew about courage, trust, and the complex relationship between humans and wildlife. The gravel crunched softly beneath Sophie's feet as she made her way toward the maintenance access gate. Each step felt heavier than the last, the morning air thick with tension. Above her, she could hear the muffled whispers of her peers, their excitement a stark contrast to the knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The security panel on the gate glowed with a steady green light, confirming Katie's observation about Jake's oversight. Sophie's trembling fingers found the latch, cool metal against her sweating palm. The mechanism released with a soft click that seemed to echo through the quiet sanctuary. Beyond the gate, Atlas's enclosure took on a different character entirely. What had appeared manageable from the observation deck now felt vast and wild. Natural boulders created shadowy recesses, and the morning mist still clung to the ground, in patches, giving the entire space an otherworldly quality. Sophie pulled her phone from her pocket, immediately opening the camera app. If she was going to go through with this insane plan, she would at least make it count. The screen displayed the time, 8:47 a.m. The staff meeting would end in exactly 23 minutes. A splash from the pond caught her attention. Atlas had been dozing near the water's edge, but now he lifted his massive head, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. Sophie froze, her thumb hovering over the camera button. From this angle, with no barriers between them, his size was overwhelming. The bear's reddish-brown fur rippled as he rose to his full height, water cascading from his coat. Sophie heard a collective gasp from the observation deck, followed by urgent whispers. She wanted to run, but remembered Dr. Martinez's lectures about predator responses. Running would trigger a chase instinct. Instead, she forced herself to remain still, her heart hammering against her ribs. Atlas lowered his head, dark eyes fixed on the intruder in his territory. He took a step forward, then another, his movements deliberate and controlled. Sophie's fingers tightened around her phone, the camera forgotten as survival instincts took over. She could hear Maddie calling her name in a harsh whisper, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. The distance between them shortened with each of Atlas's measured steps. Sophie could now see the individual droplets of water clinging to his fur, could hear his deep, rhythmic breathing. The morning sun caught the silver tags in his ears, reminders of his captive status that somehow made him seem more rather than less wild. A branch cracked somewhere in the sanctuary, and Sophie flinched. Atlas paused, his head tilting slightly, as if considering this strange human who had entered his domain. There was intelligence in his gaze that Sophie hadn't been able to discern from the observation deck, a depth of awareness that made her breath catch. Time seemed to slow as bear and girl regarded each other. Sophie became aware of small details. The way Atlas's fur moved in the morning breeze, the subtle twitching of his nose as he processed her scent, the surprising grace with which he held his massive frame. Despite her terror, she found herself fascinated by his presence. Then Atlas did something unexpected. He lowered himself to all fours and sat, much like a dog might, his eyes never leaving Sophie's face. The pose was so incongruous with his fearsome reputation that Sophie almost laughed out loud, the sound catching in her throat. From the observation deck, she could hear confusion in her friend's whispers. This wasn't how the scene was supposed to play out. Atlas was meant to be either terrifying or aggressive, not curious. Sophie found her initial terror giving way to something else, a mixture of awe and cautious wonder. Slowly, with movements that surprised even herself, Sophie raised her phone. Atlas watched the device with evident interest, his head tilting to the other side. She managed to capture several photos, the morning light perfect for highlighting his unique coloring and powerful build. A particularly loud whisper from above drew Atlas's attention. He looked up at the observation deck, then back at Sophie, as if making a connection. To her amazement, he huffed softly. Not a growl, but something almost conversational. The sound reminded her of her neighbor's elderly retriever greeting familiar faces. Sophie's scientific mind, the part of her that had earned straight A's in biology, began to take over from her fear. She observed how Atlas's body language remained relaxed, how his ears stayed forward instead of pinning back aggressively. Every detail contradicted the fearsome stories that circulated through Cedar Ridge. Without thinking, she took a small step closer, then another. Atlas remained seated, watching her approach with what could only be described as tolerance. But she was close enough to see the variations in his fur color, darker around his face, lighter on his chest. She stopped, aware that she was pushing the boundaries of both safety and common sense. The bear's presence was magnetic. Sophie found herself talking softly, the words flowing naturally despite the surreal situation. "You're not what they say you are you?" Her voice seemed to interest Atlas, who tilted his head again, ears perking forward. The moment stretched, filled with a strange peace that defied explanation. Sophie's phone continued to record, capturing a scene that would soon challenge everything Cedar Ridge thought they knew about their resident bear. She felt as if she was standing on the edge of a discovery, something that went beyond mere scientific observation. A sharp crack from behind made them both jump. Sophie spun around to see a maintenance cart rounding the corner of the visitor center. Atlas rose to his feet, but instead of charging or showing aggression, he simply backed away toward his pond, maintaining eye contact until he reached the water's edge. Reality crashed back like a thunderclap. Sophie suddenly remembered where she was, what she was doing, and how many rules she was breaking. She turned and ran for the maintenance gate, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped her phone. Behind her, she heard Atlas splash into his pond, as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a shared moment of curiosity now concluded. As she secured the gate, Sophie could hear footsteps approaching from the visitor center. Her friends were frantically gesturing for her to hurry back to the observation deck. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her legs weak with adrenaline, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She reached the deck just as Dr. Martinez's voice carried across the sanctuary, directing the maintenance staff to their morning tasks. Sophie leaned against the railing, breathing hard, her phone clutched to her chest. The other girls crowded. Around her, their faces a mixture of disbelief, excitement, and lingering fear. Below, Atlas had returned to his morning routine, giving no indication that anything unusual had occurred. But Sophie knew that everything had changed. She had glimpsed something profound in those moments of connection, a truth about nature, fear and understanding that would take her days to fully comprehend. The morning sun continued its climb over the Montana wilderness, warming the observation deck as Sophie finally found her voice to begin explaining what had just transpired. But the real story, she realized, wasn't in what she could say. It was in what she had captured on her phone, evidence of a moment that would soon challenge everything her new community believed about the complex creatures sharing their mountain home. The observation deck buzzed with frantic energy as Sophie's phone passed from hand to hand. Maddie, Olivia, and Katie huddled around the small screen, watching the footage with expressions of disbelief. The morning light strengthened, casting long shadows through the pine trees as the gravity of what had just occurred began to sink in. "I can't believe you actually did it," Maddie whispered, her earlier bravado replaced by genuine awe. She replayed the video for the 3rd time, studying Atlas's unexpected behavior. "No one in Cedar Ridge is going to believe this." Olivia remained focused on the technical aspects, her analytical mind already at work. Look at his body language. Here, she pointed to a specific moment in the footage. Everything we've learned about aggressive bear behavior, he's doing the opposite. It's like he's deliberately trying to appear non-threatening. Katie paced behind them, alternating between watching the sanctuary grounds and glancing at the video. We need to show this to someone. Dr. Martinez would... She stopped abruptly, reality crashing back. Oh God, Dr. Martinez, if she finds out... We pushed you to do this, Sophie. The mention of the sanctuary director sent a chill through the group. The excitement of their successful venture began to fade as the potential consequences loomed. Sophie reached for her phone, suddenly aware of the weight of evidence in her hands. A commotion from the visitor center drew their attention. The morning meeting had ended, and staff members were dispersing to their various duties. Through the large windows, they could see Dr. Martinez engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion with Jake, the security guard. "Delete it," Maddie said suddenly, her voice tight with urgency. "Delete everything right now. If they check the security cameras..." "There aren't any cameras covering the maintenance gate," Katie interrupted, then blushed as the others stared at her. "I mean, I noticed during my volunteer shifts, it's a blind spot." Sophie clutched her phone tighter, an unexpected defiance rising in her chest. "I'm not deleting it." The strength in her voice surprised even her. "This is important. Atlas isn't what everyone thinks he is. We have proof." Before anyone could respond, a new voice cut through their discussion. "Proof of what exactly?" The girls whirled around to find Dr. Rachel Martinez standing at the top of the deck stairs, her expression unreadable. The sanctuary director's presence seemed to physically alter the air around them, making it harder to breathe. In the awkward silence that followed, Sophie felt the weight of her phone like a burning coal in her pocket. Dr. Martinez's gaze swept over the group, lingering on their guilty expressions before settling on Sophie. "Jake mentioned seeing some unusual activity on his morning rounds," she continued, her tone professional, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "Something about voices near the restricted areas. Would any of you know anything about that?" The other girls shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence evaporating under the director's scrutiny. Sophie felt a familiar pressure building in her chest, the urge to shrink away, to let others take control of the situation. But something had changed during those moments with Atlas. The quiet girl from Seattle, who feared standing out, found herself taking a step forward. "It was me," Sophie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I went into Atlas's enclosure." The admission hung in the morning air like fog. Dr. Martinez's expression shifted from professional concern to something darker. "My office, now." She turned to the other girls. "All of you." The walk to the administrative building felt endless. Sophie could feel her friends' nervous energy behind her, could sense their unspoken fears about what awaited them. The morning sun, so gentle during her encounter with Atlas, now felt harsh and exposing. Dr. Martinez's office reflected her practical nature. Maps of the sanctuary covered one wall, while detailed wildlife rehabilitation protocols filled. A massive bookshelf. She settled behind her desk, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably before speaking. "Do you understand what could have happened this morning?" The question cut through the room like a blade. "Atlas may appear docile, but he is a wild animal. 300 pounds of instinct and power that could have ended your life in seconds." Sophie winced at the words, but something made her reach for her phone. "But he didn't," she said quietly. "Please just look at what happened." Dr. Martinez's expression remained stern, but she held out her hand for the phone. The next few minutes passed in tense silence as she watched the footage, her face giving nothing away. When she finally looked up, her eyes had a different quality, something between confusion and intense interest. This behavior, she said slowly, rewinding to watch a specific moment again. It's unprecedented for Atlas. Even with our most experienced handlers, he maintains a distinct boundary. She looked at Sophie with new consideration. What exactly happened out there? The question opened a floodgate. Sophie found herself describing every detail of the encounter, the way Atlas had approached, his careful movements, the moment of connection she'd felt. As she spoke, she noticed Dr. Martinez taking notes, her earlier anger giving way to professional curiosity. The others put you up to this, I assume? The director glanced at the other girls, who had the grace to look ashamed. A dangerous and foolish decision that could have had tragic consequences. She paused, studying the phone footage one more time. However, that single word changed the atmosphere in the office. Everyone leaned forward slightly, waiting. What you've captured here could be invaluable to our understanding of rehabilitated bears. Atlas's case is unique. Rescued so young, raised in captivity but never fully domesticated. His responses to human interaction have always been a point of study for us. Dr. Martinez stood, pacing behind her desk as she thought. You'll all have additional duties for the next month. Cleaning enclosures, maintaining the grounds. Consider it both punishment and an opportunity to learn proper sanctuary protocols. She fixed each girl with a stern look. And if anything like this ever happens again, you'll be permanently banned from the sanctuary. Is that clear? They nodded quickly, relief mixing with lingering anxiety. Sophie. Dr. Martinez's voice stopped them as they turned to leave. Stay a moment. The other girls filed out, leaving Sophie alone with the director. Her heart resumed its rapid beating as Dr. Martinez studied her with an intensity that recalled Atlas's thoughtful gaze. What you did was reckless, the director began, but your observations afterward were surprisingly detailed. How would you feel about helping us document Atlas's behavior more formally, from outside the enclosure? She added quickly, seeing Sophie's expression. We've been developing new protocols for rehabilitated predator care, and your perspective could be valuable. The offer hung in the air like morning mist, full of possibility. Sophie thought about the connection she'd felt with Atlas, the way fear had transformed into understanding. She thought about her careful notes, her attention to detail that had previously felt inadequate among her more outgoing peers. Yes, she answered, surprising herself with the eagerness in her voice. I'd like that very much. As she left the office, Sophie caught a glimpse of Atlas through the window. He was back at his pond, powerful and peaceful in the late morning sun. Something had shifted that morning, not just between a girl and a bear, but in the way Sophie saw herself and her place in this mountain community. The day stretched ahead, full of new possibilities and uncharted territories. Cedar Ridge had always felt like a temporary stop in Sophie's life, but now, standing in the warm Montana sunlight, she began to feel the first real stirrings of belonging. The Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary transformed in the weeks that followed, taking on new dimensions as Sophie immersed herself in her expanded role. Her mornings began earlier now, arriving before the tourist crowds to help Dr. Martinez document Atlas's daily routines. The punishment duties assigned to all the girls had become opportunities, each task revealing new layers of understanding about the sanctuary's complex ecosystem. Under Dr. Martinez's guidance, Sophie learned to recognize subtle variations in Atlas's behavior. His morning stretches indicated his mood for the day. His specific grunts and huffs carried different meanings. Even the way he approached his enrichment activities offered insights into his psychological state. Each observation went into detailed logs that would help shape future rehabilitation protocols. One particularly warm morning, as Sophie set up her observation equipment on the deck, she noticed something unusual. Atlas was pacing near the maintenance gate, his movements different from his normal routine. His head kept turning toward the visitor center, nose working the air with obvious interest. "He's been doing that since dawn," said a voice behind her. Dr. Martinez joined Sophie at the railing, her own notebook in hand. Some things caught his attention, but what's really interesting is his body language. No signs of agitation or territorial behavior. Before Sophie could respond, a commotion erupted from the visitor center. A group of elementary school students poured out onto the grounds, their excited chatter carrying across the sanctuary. It was the first day of the summer education program, bringing dozens of local children to learn about wildlife conservation. Atlas's reaction was immediate and unexpected. Instead of retreating to his cave as he typically did during noisy tour groups, he moved closer to the viewing area. His posture remained relaxed, head tilted in that now familiar expression of curiosity. "Remarkable," Dr. Martinez murmured, scribbling notes. "In all the years we've had him, he's never shown this level of interest in children. The noise alone usually sends him seeking shelter." Sophie watched as the young students gathered at the main viewing area, their small faces pressing against the safety glass. Their teacher, attempting to maintain order, began explaining facts about grizzly bears, but her lesson was interrupted by gasps of wonder as Atlas approached the glass. The massive bear moved with deliberate gentleness, as if aware of his impact on his young audience. He settled into a sitting position just feet from the viewing area, maintaining a calm demeanor that had the children transfixed. Even their teacher fell silent, her prepared speech forgotten in the face of such unexpected behavior. "Look at their faces," Sophie whispered, gesturing to the children. Where there should have been fear, there was only fascination. Atlas's presence, rather than frightening them, seemed to create a bridge of understanding. It reminded Sophie of her own transformative encounter, how fear had given way to something deeper. A small boy at the front of the group pressed his hand against the glass. Atlas, in a moment that would later be described as extraordinary by everyone present, lifted his massive paw and placed it against the barrier, directly opposite the child's hand. The size difference was startling. The bear's paw dwarfed the boy's entire hand, but the gentle intent behind the gesture was unmistakable. "Get your camera," Dr. Martinez said quietly, her professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine emotion. "This is unprecedented behavior for a rehabilitated predator. We need to document everything." Sophie's hands trembled as she set up her equipment, but her movements were sure and practiced now. Through the lens, she captured moments that would challenge conventional wisdom about rehabilitated wildlife. Atlas following the children's movements with gentle interest, responding to their voices with soft huffs, maintaining a consistently non-threatening posture. The school group stayed longer than planned. Their scheduled tour transformed into an impromptu lesson in animal behavior. The teacher, recovering her composure, began asking Dr. Martinez questions about Atlas's history and rehabilitation. The children listened with rapt attention, their earlier excitement settling into focused curiosity. As the morning progressed, more visitors gathered at the viewing area, drawn by the unusual sight of Atlas's peaceful interaction with the children. Sophie overheard snippets of conversation that reflected the shifting perceptions. Longtime Cedar Ridge residents expressing surprise at the bear's gentle nature, tourists asking about rehabilitation success stories, parents using the moment to teach their children about respect for wildlife. Dr. Martinez moved through the growing crowd, answering questions and sharing insights about the sanctuary's mission. Her earlier stern demeanor had given way to passionate enthusiasm, as she explained how moments like this could change public understanding of wildlife rehabilitation. Sophie continued her documentation, but her mind wandered to the implications of what they were witnessing. Atlas wasn't just challenging preconceptions about rehabilitated predators, he was actively participating in his own story's transformation. Each gentle interaction, each moment of connection helped bridge the gap between fear and understanding. The morning's events sparked something new in the sanctuary. Dr. Martinez called an emergency staff meeting that afternoon, gathering the wildlife specialists, educators, and care teams. Sophie, included now in these professional discussions, watched as plans evolved to incorporate Atlas's unexpected social behavior into the sanctuary's educational programs. Ideas flowed freely: supervised viewing sessions during children's workshops, research studies on rehabilitated predator socialization, new educational materials highlighting success stories. In wildlife rehabilitation, Atlas's gentle interaction with the school group had opened doors no one had previously thought possible. As the sun began its descent behind the Montana mountains, Sophie made her final notes of the day. Atlas had returned to his normal routine, but something fundamental had shifted. The bear's demonstration of gentleness toward children had created ripples that would extend far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. In the warm evening light, Sophie watched Atlas prepare for his evening rest. His massive form moved with the same grace she'd first noticed during their encounter. But now she saw something more, a complexity of spirit that defied simple classification. He wasn't just a rehabilitated predator or a sanctuary resident. He was becoming a bridge between worlds, challenging assumptions about what was possible when fear gave way to understanding. News of Atlas's gentle interaction with the school children spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. Local social media buzzed with photos and videos from the morning's events, each share accompanied by expressions of amazement and renewed interest in the sanctuary's work. The story caught the attention of regional news outlets, and by sunset, Dr. Martinez was fielding calls from reporters eager to learn more about the sanctuary's unique resident. The sudden spotlight brought both opportunities and challenges. Dr. Martinez worked tirelessly to manage the increased attention, ensuring that every story emphasized responsible wildlife interaction and conservation efforts. Meanwhile, Sophie found herself thrust into an unexpected role as she assisted with documentation and observation of Atlas's continuing behavioral evolution. One crisp morning, as autumn painted the Montana landscape in rich golds and deep reds, an unexpected visitor arrived at the sanctuary. Dr. James Wilson, a renowned wildlife behaviorist from the University of Montana, stood at the observation deck with Dr. Martinez, his keen eyes studying Atlas's enclosure. "Fascinating," he murmured, reviewing the footage from Sophie's documentation. "The level of social awareness he displays is remarkable for a rehabilitated predator. Have you noticed any patterns in his selective interaction?" Before Dr. Martinez could respond, a commotion erupted near the visitor center. A group of teenagers, none of them familiar to Sophie, had slipped past the security checkpoint and were making their way toward Atlas's enclosure. Their loud laughter and aggressive movements immediately caught the bear's attention. Atlas's reaction was immediate and telling. Unlike his gentle curiosity with the school children, he retreated to the far end of his enclosure, maintaining a cautious distance. His body language spoke volumes, not aggressive, but clearly communicating his discomfort with their disruptive presence. "There's your answer," Dr. Martinez said quietly to Dr. Wilson. "He seems to recognize and respond to different types of energy and intent. With respectful visitors, especially children, he shows curiosity and gentleness. With more aggressive or disruptive presences." Security quickly intercepted the teenagers, escorting them back to the visitor center for a stern talk about sanctuary protocols. Sophie watched as Atlas gradually relaxed, returning to his usual spots once the disruption had passed. Dr. Wilson scribbled rapid notes in his journal. This level of emotional intelligence. It challenges everything we thought we knew about. Rehabilitated predators. His ability to read and respond to human behavior patterns suggests a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Maddie, Olivia, and Katie. The girls had maintained their connection to the sanctuary, their earlier reckless behavior transformed into genuine commitment to wildlife education. They now helped, with younger visitors sharing their own journey from fear to understanding. "Dr. Martinez," Maddie called out, excitement evident in her voice. The elementary school asked if they could make Atlas their official mascot. They want to change their team name from the Eagles to the Atlas Bears. The news brought smiles to everyone's faces. It was a small change, but it represented something significant. A community actively choosing to embrace rather than fear. And their unique neighbor. Dr. Wilson turned to Sophie, who had been quietly documenting the morning's events. "Young lady, Dr. Martinez tells me you've been instrumental in recording Atlas's behavioral patterns. Would you be interested in contributing to a formal research paper? Your observations could help shape our understanding of wildlife rehabilitation practices." Sophie felt a surge of pride mixed with humility. Her quiet attention to detail, once a source of self-doubt, had become a valuable asset in understanding Atlas's complex nature. The discussion was cut short by a deep, resonant sound from the enclosure. Atlas had positioned himself near the observation deck, his attention fixed on something in the distance. Following his gaze, they spotted a young deer that had somehow wandered close to the sanctuary's perimeter fence. Everyone watched, fascinated, as Atlas tracked the deer's movements. His behavior defied typical predator responses. Instead of showing hunting instincts, he displayed the same careful curiosity he'd shown toward human visitors. "He's completely rewriting our understanding of rehabilitated predator behavior," Dr. Wilson mused. "This isn't just about absence of aggression, it's about the presence of something else entirely, a kind of emotional intelligence we've never fully documented in rehabilitated bears." The morning unfolded with a series of small but significant moments. A young girl with autism, initially frightened of the sanctuary's residents, found herself drawn to Atlas's calm presence. An elderly visitor shared stories of his own wildlife encounters, his perspective softening as he watched the bear's gentle interactions. Sophie documented each moment, her camera capturing not just behavior, but transformation, the subtle shifts in understanding that occurred when preconceptions met reality. Dr. Wilson periodically asked questions, his initial academic interest giving way to genuine wonder at Atlas's unique personality. As the day progressed, Dr. Martinez gathered the sanctuary staff for an impromptu meeting. "We have an opportunity here," she announced, "to change the narrative about wildlife rehabilitation. Atlas isn't just a success story. He's becoming an ambassador for understanding between species." Plans began to take shape for an expanded educational program. The sanctuary would develop special sessions focusing on emotional intelligence in wildlife, using Atlas's story to challenge assumptions about predator behavior. Dr. Wilson offered to help develop research protocols that would document and analyze these unprecedented behavioral patterns. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary as the meeting concluded. Sophie remained at her observation post, watching Atlas prepare for his evening routine. The bear paused in his movements, looking up at the deck where she stood. In that moment, she felt the weight of responsibility that came with being a bridge between worlds, the human desire to understand and the wild spirit that could never be fully tamed. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and approaching winter, reminding everyone that change was constant, in nature as in understanding. Atlas settled into his favorite spot near the pond, his presence both powerful and peaceful, a living testament to the possibility of transformation. Winter descended upon Cedar Ridge with a fierce intensity, blanketing the Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary in pristine snow. The transformation brought new challenges and revelations as Atlas adapted to the seasonal changes. Dr. Martinez had initiated special winter enrichment programs, ensuring the sanctuary's residents remained active and engaged despite the harsh conditions. On a particularly cold morning, Sophie arrived early to find the sanctuary eerily quiet. The usual morning routines were disrupted by a heavy snowfall that had left nearly 3 feet of fresh powder across the grounds. As she made her way to her observation post, she noticed something unusual about Atlas's behavior. The massive bear seemed agitated, pacing near the eastern edge of his enclosure. His movements were purposeful rather than anxious, and he kept returning to one specific spot, huffing and pawing at the snow. Dr. Martinez joined Sophie, her breath visible in the frigid air as she studied Atlas's actions. "He's been doing that since before dawn," Dr. Martinez explained, adjusting her heavy winter coat. "Our thermal cameras picked up some unusual activity in that area last night, but the snow's making it difficult to determine what caught his attention." A muffled sound, barely audible over the winter wind, drifted from the direction of Atlas's focus. The bear's reaction was immediate. He lowered his massive head, ears forward, and let out a soft whine that seemed completely at odds with his imposing size. Dr. Martinez raised her binoculars, scanning the area carefully. Suddenly, she stiffened. "Get the emergency response team," she ordered, her voice tight with urgency. "There's someone down there partially buried in the snow. They must have fallen from the upper trail during the night." The next few minutes erupted in controlled chaos as the sanctuary's emergency protocols activated. The response team arrived quickly, but they faced an immediate challenge. The victim lay just beyond the outer edge of Atlas's enclosure, and the bear's proximity made any rescue attempt potentially dangerous. "We'll need to sedate him," the head of security announced, already preparing the tranquilizer equipment. "It's too risky to attempt a rescue with him so close." But Dr. Martinez held up her hand, her eyes fixed on Atlas's behavior. The bear had settled into a protective posture, his body positioned between the fallen person and the harsh wind. More surprisingly, he began carefully clearing snow away from the area with gentle sweeps of his massive paw. "Wait," she commanded. "Look at his body language. He's not displaying any aggression. In fact..." She trailed off as Atlas let out another soft whine, his actions becoming more deliberate. Sophie, who had been documenting everything, suddenly understood. "He's trying to help," she breathed, her camera capturing every moment. Just like with the children, he's showing concern rather than aggression. After a quick consultation with Dr. Wilson, who had been called to observe the unprecedented situation, Dr. Martinez made a bold decision. The rescue team would approach, without sedating Atlas, but with full safety protocols in place. Every moment counted in the freezing conditions. As the team cautiously entered the enclosure, Atlas's behavior exceeded even Dr. Martinez's expectations. The bear actually shifted to make room for the rescuers while maintaining his protective position against the wind. His presence, rather than hindering the rescue, seemed to provide an unexpected advantage. His massive body acted as a windbreak, giving the team crucial minutes to work. The victim turned out to be Mark Thompson, a local wildlife photographer who had been attempting to capture dawn images when he slipped on the icy trail. He was hypothermic but conscious, and his first words upon revival stunned everyone present. "The bear," he whispered through chattering teeth as the medical team worked to warm him. "He kept me alive. Every time I started to lose consciousness, he would make noise or move the snow. I thought I was hallucinating, but he was watching over me." The incident made headlines across the country. A wildlife photographer saved from freezing to death by the very subject he had come to document, and not just any subject. but a rehabilitated grizzly bear whose actions defied every conventional expectation of predator behavior. Dr. Wilson arrived the next day with a team of researchers eager to understand the factors that had influenced Atlas's protective response. "This goes beyond simple behavioral conditioning," he explained during an impromptu conference in the sanctuary's research center. "What we're seeing here suggests a level of empathy previously undocumented in rehabilitated predators." The following weeks brought a stream of wildlife behavioral experts to Pine Valley, each eager to observe Atlas's unique characteristics. The bear's actions had sparked intense debate in the scientific community about the emotional capacity of rehabilitated wildlife. Dr. Martinez found herself at the center of a revolution in wildlife rehabilitation theory. Sophie's detailed documentation of Atlas's behavior became invaluable as researchers worked to understand the implications of his actions. Her quiet observations had captured subtle details that helped create a fuller picture of his emotional intelligence. The young girl who had once felt out of place in Cedar Ridge was now contributing to groundbreaking research in wildlife behavior. Local attitudes toward the sanctuary shifted dramatically. Mark Thompson, once recovered, became one of its strongest advocates, sharing his story of survival through various media outlets. His photographs of Atlas, taken during happier circumstances, revealed the bear's gentle nature in ways that resonated with viewers worldwide. The sanctuary's educational programs evolved to incorporate this new understanding of wildlife behavior. Students from across the country began visiting Pine Valley, drawn by the opportunity to observe and learn from Atlas's example. The bear's story challenged long-held beliefs about the limitations of human-wildlife relationships, opening new possibilities for conservation and rehabilitation efforts. As winter maintained its grip on Cedar Ridge, Atlas continued to surprise and educate those around him. His morning routines now included regular interaction with sanctuary staff, always maintaining appropriate safety protocols, but demonstrating an understanding that seemed to transcend species boundaries. Sophie found herself at the heart of these changes, her initial frightening encounter with Atlas having sparked a transformation that rippled far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. Her daily observations had become part of a larger narrative about the capacity for understanding between humans and wildlife, challenging assumptions and opening new pathways for conservation efforts worldwide. Spring arrived in Cedar Ridge, bringing with it an unexpected development at Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary. The morning air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers as Dr. Martinez called an emergency staff meeting in the research center. The room buzzed with anticipation as she unveiled architectural plans spread across the conference table. The University of Montana, in partnership with several wildlife conservation organizations, has proposed something unprecedented, she announced, her fingers tracing the detailed drawings. They want to establish the Atlas Center for Wildlife Rehabilitation Studies right here at Pine Valley. The plans revealed an ambitious vision, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to studying and advancing rehabilitation techniques for predator species. The proposed center would include research laboratories, educational spaces, and most importantly, innovative enclosure designs based on the insights gained from Atlas's case. Sophie studied the drawings with growing excitement. The new facility would incorporate observation areas designed to facilitate the kind of careful documentation she had been conducting. But what caught her attention was a special section dedicated to investigating the emotional intelligence of rehabilitated wildlife. Thanks to the documentation of Atlas's behavior, we've secured substantial funding, Dr. Martinez continued. The scientific community is intensely interested in understanding how and why a rehabilitated predator developed such sophisticated social awareness. Dr. Wilson, who had become a regular presence at the sanctuary, stepped forward to elaborate. What we've observed with Atlas suggests possibilities we never considered in wildlife rehabilitation. His ability to differentiate between various human intentions and respond appropriately indicates cognitive abilities we're only beginning to understand. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent call from the security team. A situation was developing at Atlas's enclosure that required immediate attention. The staff hurried outside to find an unusual scene unfolding. A young moose, disorientated and injured, had somehow wandered into the sanctuary grounds and found its way into Atlas's enclosure through a maintenance access point left open during morning routines. The situation had all the ingredients for disaster. A wounded prey animal in close proximity to a powerful predator. But Atlas's response defied natural expectations. Instead of displaying predatory behavior, he maintained a cautious distance from the frightened moose. More remarkably, he positioned himself between the injured animal and the maintenance gate, preventing it from stumbling into more dangerous areas of the sanctuary. Dr. Martinez quickly organized a response team while Sophie documented Atlas's unexpected behavior. The bear's actions seemed calculated to avoid startling the injured moose, his movements slow and deliberate. When sanctuary staff approached with tranquilizer equipment, Atlas actually backed away, giving them clear access to help the distressed animal. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Wilson murmured, furiously taking notes. "He's not just showing restraint, he's actively facilitating a rescue. The implications for our understanding of rehabilitated predator cognition are staggering." The incident attracted immediate attention from wildlife behavioral experts. Video footage of Atlas's response spread rapidly through scientific circles, prompting intense discussion about the potential for emotional development in rehabilitated predators. The timing couldn't have been better for the proposed Atlas Center. As spring progressed, construction began on the new facility. The sanctuary remained open, with Atlas's enclosure becoming an impromptu classroom for visiting researchers and students. Sophie found herself increasingly involved in educational programs, sharing her observations with a growing audience of wildlife enthusiasts and conservation specialists. One warm afternoon, as construction crews worked nearby, Sophie noticed Atlas watching the activity with his characteristic thoughtful expression. Dr. Martinez joined her at the observation post, carrying a thick folder of research papers. "The latest studies are showing something remarkable," she said, opening the folder to reveal brain scan comparisons. Atlas's neural responses to human and animal interactions are unlike anything previously documented in rehabilitated predators. It's as if he's developed an entirely new framework for interpreting and responding to his environment. The implications of these findings reached far beyond Cedar Ridge. Wildlife rehabilitation centers across the country began requesting information about Pine Valley's protocols. Atlas's story challenged fundamental assumptions about the limitations of rehabilitated wildlife, opening new possibilities for conservation efforts worldwide. As the Atlas Center took shape, the sanctuary's educational programs expanded to accommodate growing interest. School groups now participated in interactive sessions that emphasized understanding rather than fear. Children learned about wildlife behavior through the lens of Atlas's extraordinary example, developing early appreciation for conservation efforts. Sophie's role evolved as well. Her detailed documentation of Atlas's behavior became the foundation for new research protocols. She worked closely with Dr. Wilson and his team, helping develop standardized observation methods that could be applied at other rehabilitation facilities. The construction noise seemed to intrigue rather than disturb Atlas. He often watched the workers with evident interest, his behavior providing yet another opportunity for researchers to study his unique cognitive development. His reactions to various construction vehicles and activities became part of an ongoing study about environmental adaptation in rehabilitated wildlife. Late one afternoon, as the spring sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary, Dr. Martinez shared a surprising revelation with Sophie. "We've been invited to present Atlas's case at the International Wildlife Conservation Conference in Geneva," she announced. "Your documentation will be central to our presentation. How would you feel about joining the team?" The invitation represented more than professional recognition. It was an opportunity to share Atlas's story with the global conservation community. Sophie thought about her journey from frightened newcomer to contributing researcher, how one unexpected encounter had transformed not only her life, but the lives of countless others through its rippling effects on wildlife rehabilitation practices. As she considered the invitation, Atlas approached the observation area, his movements carrying the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. He settled into his familiar sitting position, watching the last construction vehicles leave for the day. In his gentle presence, Sophie felt the weight of responsibility and opportunity that came with being part of his extraordinary story. The spring breeze carried the promise of change as Pine Valley prepared for its evolution into a leading center for wildlife rehabilitation research. Atlas's legacy would extend far beyond the boundaries of his enclosure, challenging preconceptions and opening new pathways for understanding the complex relationship between humans and wildlife. The Atlas Center for Wildlife Rehabilitation Studies stood gleaming in the summer sun, its modern architecture blending seamlessly with the natural landscape of Pine Valley. Inside the state-of-the-art facility, researchers and students bustled through corridors lined with interactive displays showcasing breakthrough findings in wildlife rehabilitation. Dr. Martinez strode purposefully through the main research wing, her tablet displaying real-time data from various enclosures throughout the sanctuary. She paused at the window overlooking Atlas's expanded habitat, where sophisticated monitoring equipment tracked every aspect of his behavior. The morning's readings had shown an unusual pattern of activity. "His stress indicators are elevated," she murmured, studying the charts, "but there's no clear environmental trigger." The bear's vital signs, while not alarming, suggested something was affecting his typically calm demeanor. Sophie, now wearing the official uniform of a junior research associate, joined Dr. Martinez at the window. Her trained eye caught subtle changes in Atlas's movement patterns, the way he kept returning to the eastern corner of his enclosure, his heightened alertness to sounds from beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. A distant rumble of thunder provided the first clue to Atlas's behavior. The Weather Service had warned of an approaching storm system, but this was more than typical mountain weather. The atmospheric pressure was dropping rapidly, and animals throughout the sanctuary showed signs of increasing restlessness. Dr. Wilson emerged from his research station, carrying printouts of seismic data. "We're picking up tremors," he announced, his voice tight with concern. "The Geological Survey team warns we might be looking at a significant event. The animals are sensing it before our instruments can fully detect it." Atlas's behavior suddenly shifted from restless to purposeful. He began moving methodically along the perimeter of his enclosure, pausing at specific points as if conducting an inspection. The researchers watched in fascination as he displayed what appeared to be preventive behavior, clearing loose branches and rocks from key areas. "He's preparing," Sophie realized, her documentation tablet recording every movement. "Just like he did during the winter rescue, he's anticipating a need for safe spaces." The sanctuary's emergency protocols activated as the first major tremor shook the valley, Staff rushed to secure equipment and ensure all enclosures were stable. But Atlas's enclosure presented a unique situation. His behavior suggested he might be more valuable unconstrained during the emergency. The ground shook violently as the full force of the earthquake struck Cedar Ridge. Trees swayed dangerously, and the sound of falling rocks echoed through the valley. In Atlas's enclosure, a section of the containment wall suffered damage, creating a potential escape route for the massive bear. Instead of attempting to flee, Atlas positioned himself near the damaged section, his powerful body becoming a living barrier. When a group of smaller animals from adjacent enclosures, panicked by the tremors, sought shelter in his territory, he calmly made space for them, maintaining a protective presence. The earthquake lasted only minutes, but its impact transformed the sanctuary. As the dust settled, staff members emerged to assess the damage. They found Atlas still maintaining his vigilant position, watching over not only his own space, but the surrounding areas as well. Dr. Martinez made a bold decision. With the containment wall compromised and aftershocks likely, she authorized a controlled opening of Atlas's enclosure. He's shown us time and again that he understands emergency situations, she explained to the concerned security team. Right. Now, his instincts might be our best asset. As if understanding the gravity of the situation, Atlas moved carefully through the opening. His presence, rather than causing panic, seemed to have a calming effect on other animals and humans alike. He methodically checked different areas of the sanctuary, his behavior displaying a level of situational awareness that left even experienced researchers astounded. The aftershocks continued throughout the day, but Atlas remained focused on his self-appointed task. He helped locate injured animals, guided disorientated creatures to safe areas, and even assisted the maintenance team by clearing paths of debris with his powerful frame. News crews arriving to cover the earthquake's impact found themselves documenting an unprecedented story of animal cognition and emergency response. Atlas's behavior during the crisis provided compelling evidence for the sophisticated emotional and intellectual capabilities of rehabilitated wildlife. As evening approached and the aftershocks finally subsided, Atlas voluntarily returned to his enclosure. He appeared exhausted but maintained his watchful demeanor, responding to each tremor with renewed alertness. The sanctuary staff worked through the night to repair the damage, their efforts accompanied by the reassuring presence of their most unusual guardian. The earthquake became a turning point in wildlife rehabilitation research. Atlas's response to the crisis demonstrated levels of cognitive function and emotional intelligence that challenged existing paradigms. The data collected during the event would fill research papers and spark debates in scientific communities worldwide. Dr. Wilson worked late into the night, analyzing the behavioral data recorded during the crisis. What we witness today goes beyond learned responses or conditioning, he explained to his research team. Atlas showed complex problem-solving abilities and what appears to be genuine altruistic behavior, characteristics we never expected to document in a rehabilitated predator. The events reinforced the importance of the Atlas Center's mission. As recovery efforts continued in the following days, researchers from around the world arrived to study not just Atlas's crisis response, but the broader implications for wildlife rehabilitation programs. Sophie found herself at the center of these discussions, her detailed documentation of Atlas's behavior providing crucial insights into his decision-making processes during the emergency. Her observation skills, honed through countless hours of careful study, helped create a comprehensive picture of advanced cognitive capabilities in rehabilitated wildlife. The earthquake, despite its destructive nature, had provided an unprecedented opportunity to study wildlife behavior under extreme conditions. Atlas's actions during the crisis would influence rehabilitation protocols and emergency response procedures at wildlife facilities across the globe. Autumn painted Cedar Ridge in brilliant hues as Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary prepared for a momentous occasion. The International Wildlife Conservation Conference had chosen the Atlas Center as its host venue, bringing together leading researchers, conservationists, and wildlife specialists from around the globe. The sanctuary grounds buzzed with activity as final preparations were made for the groundbreaking event. On the morning of the conference, Sophie stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the badge that identified her as a key presenter. Her research paper, co-authored with Dr. Martinez and Dr. Wilson, would open the conference's main session. The magnitude of the moment wasn't lost on her, a 16-year-old girl preparing to address the world's leading wildlife experts. The conference center, an extension of the Atlas Center, filled quickly with attendees eager to learn about the revolutionary approaches to wildlife rehabilitation developed at Pine Valley. Conversations in multiple languages filled the air as researchers shared preliminary findings and discussed new possibilities in animal cognition studies. Dr. Martinez gathered her team for a final briefing before the presentations began. "Today isn't just about sharing research," she reminded them. "It's about challenging fundamental assumptions about wildlife rehabilitation. Atlas has shown us possibilities that many thought impossible." As if aware of his role in the day's events, Atlas displayed unusually focused behavior in his enclosure. The observation teams noted how he positioned himself to be visible to the gathering crowds, his demeanor calm and engaged. Foreign researchers watched in amazement as he responded to various staff members with distinct levels of recognition. The main presentation began with Sophie's comprehensive documentation of Atlas's behavioral evolution. Her quiet voice grew stronger as she shared the detailed observations that had helped reshape understanding of rehabilitated predator cognition. The audience sat transfixed as video clips demonstrated Atlas's remarkable capacity for emotional intelligence and situational awareness. During the mid-morning break, an unexpected visitor arrived at the sanctuary. Maria Torres, a renowned animal behaviorist from Spain, had brought footage from a rehabilitation center in the Pyrenees Mountains. Her team had implemented protocols based on Pine Valley's research, with remarkable results. The footage showed a rehabilitated wolf displaying similar patterns of emotional intelligence and social awareness to Atlas. The implications were clear. The capabilities observed in Atlas weren't unique to him, but potentially represented untapped potential in rehabilitated wildlife worldwide. As the conference proceedings continued, Atlas provided an impromptu demonstration of his cognitive abilities. A young researcher had accidentally dropped her notebook near his enclosure. Instead of ignoring the object, Atlas carefully nudged it closer to the fence with a stick, his actions clearly intended to help retrieve the lost item. The incident sparked intense discussion among the assembled experts. Dr. Wilson quickly organized an impromptu workshop to analyze the tool use implications of Atlas's behavior. The simple act of using a stick to move an object demonstrated problem-solving, capabilities previously undocumented in rehabilitated bears. Late afternoon brought the conference's most ambitious presentation. Dr. Martinez unveiled plans for an international network of rehabilitation centers based on the Atlas model. The proposed system would standardize rehabilitation protocols while accounting for regional and species-specific variations, creating a global framework for advanced wildlife rehabilitation. The sanctuary's success had attracted significant funding from conservation organizations and private donors. Plans included satellite facilities in various ecosystems, each designed to study and implement the emotional intelligence-based rehabilitation methods pioneered with Atlas. Sophie found herself surrounded by researchers eager to learn more about her observation techniques. Her methodical documentation of Atlas's behaviors had helped create a standardized system for assessing cognitive development in rehabilitated wildlife. Several universities expressed interest in developing these methods into formal research protocols. As evening approached, the conference participants gathered for a special demonstration. Atlas's enrichment session had been modified to showcase the full range of his cognitive abilities. The assembled experts watched in amazement as he navigated complex problem-solving scenarios, demonstrating levels of reasoning that challenged existing theories about animal intelligence. Dr. Torres approached Sophie after the demonstration, her eyes bright with excitement. "Your work here has implications far beyond wildlife rehabilitation," she explained. "You're helping us understand the true potential for connection between humans and animals. This could revolutionize conservation efforts worldwide." The day's events concluded with a candlelit dinner in the Atlas Center's Grand Hall. Conversations flowed freely as researchers from different continents shared experiences and planned future collaborations. The spirit of possibility that had begun with one unusual bear had grown into a global movement for understanding wildlife rehabilitation. Sophie stepped outside during the dinner, seeking a moment of quiet reflection. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and distant snow as she made her way to Atlas's enclosure. The bear sat in his familiar spot, his powerful presence somehow both wild and deeply connected to the human world that had gathered to learn from him. A soft rain began to fall, creating a gentle curtain between Sophie and the conference festivities behind her. In this quiet moment, watching Atlas's calm vigilance, she felt the weight of everything that had changed since that first frightening encounter. The scared girl from Seattle had found not just her place in Cedar Ridge, but her role in reshaping humanity's understanding of wildlife rehabilitation. The conference would continue for several more days, filling the Atlas Center with ideas and possibilities that would shape the future of wildlife conservation. But in that rainy moment, Sophie understood that the real work had only begun. Atlas had opened a door to understanding that would take years to fully explore, challenging preconceptions and creating new pathways for connection between humans and wildlife. Beyond the conference's groundbreaking achievements, life at Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary settled into a new rhythm as winter approached. The international spotlight had brought changes, with researchers and students from around the world now regularly visiting the Atlas Center. Yet amidst the growing academic presence, an unexpected challenge emerged that would test everything the sanctuary had learned about wildlife rehabilitation. Late one November evening, as the first snow dusted Cedar Ridge, an emergency call reached Dr. Martinez. A logging accident in the remote wilderness had orphaned two bear cubs, their mother tragically killed by falling equipment. The cubs, no more than 8 months old, were being transported to Pine Valley as the region's premier rehabilitation facility. The arrival of the orphaned cubs presented a unique dilemma. Traditional rehabilitation protocols would keep them isolated from other bears to prevent imprinting or habituation. However, Dr. Martinez and her team saw an unprecedented opportunity. Atlas's extraordinary emotional intelligence might offer these cubs something beyond basic rehabilitation. Sophie watched from her observation post as the cubs were settled into a specially prepared area adjacent to Atlas's enclosure. The young bears, still traumatized from their ordeal, huddled together in their shelter, their distress evident in their constant whimpering. Atlas's reaction to their arrival was immediate and profound. The massive bear approached the shared boundary of their enclosures with uncharacteristic urgency. His behavior displayed none of the territorial aggression typical of adult males, encountering cubs. Instead, he exhibited signs of what Dr. Wilson could only describe as concern, vocalizing soft huffs that seemed intended to comfort the frightened youngsters. Dr. Martinez made a controversial decision. After consulting with her international colleagues and carefully reviewing Atlas's history of gentle interactions, she proposed a controlled introduction. The scientific community watched with bated breath as the sanctuary prepared for an experiment that could revolutionize wildlife rehabilitation practices. The morning of the introduction arrived clear and cold. Security teams stood ready with tranquilizer equipment, though Sophie noted that Atlas's body language showed no signs of aggression. The cubs, named Luna and Echo by the sanctuary staff, remained nervous but responsive to their environment. As the gate between the enclosures slowly opened, Atlas demonstrated extraordinary restraint. He remained at a distance, allowing the cubs to explore the boundary at their own pace. His behavior suggested an understanding of their traumatized state that went beyond instinct. When Luna, the bolder of the cubs, finally ventured closer, Atlas lowered himself to appear less threatening. The interaction that followed astonished even the most experienced researchers. Atlas began demonstrating foraging behaviors, showing the cubs how to dig for roots and find hidden treats the staff had planted. His movements were deliberately slow and exaggerated, as if he were consciously teaching. Echo, though more hesitant, gradually began mimicking his actions. Dr. Wilson worked frantically to document every aspect of the unprecedented mentorship. He's not just tolerating them, he explained to visiting researchers. He's actively engaging in teaching behaviors. This goes beyond anything we've documented in rehabilitated predators. Over the following weeks, Atlas's interaction with the cubs evolved into something remarkable. He showed them safe spaces during storms, demonstrated problem-solving techniques with enrichment toys, and even intervened when their play became too rough. His guidance provided something the sanctuary's human caretakers never could, a model for natural bear behavior. Luna and Echo thrived under Atlas's influence. Their rehabilitation progressed faster than any previous cases, with the cubs developing strong survival skills while maintaining a healthy wariness of humans. The success of this unconventional approach attracted attention from rehabilitation centers worldwide. Sophie's documentation captured subtle nuances in the relationships that formed. Atlas showed distinct approaches with each cub, more patient with timid Echo, more challenging with adventurous Luna. His ability to adapt his behavior to their individual personalities suggested a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics. The sanctuary's success with the cubs led to the development of new rehabilitation protocols. The Atlas method, as it became known, emphasized the potential role of rehabilitated adult animals in the recovery of orphaned wildlife. Centers across the globe began identifying candidates for similar mentorship programs. As winter deepened, the cubs grew stronger and more confident. Their progress offered hope for a future return to the wild, though their bond with Atlas raised questions about the traditional timing of release programs. Dr. Martinez found herself navigating uncharted territory, balancing the cubs' need for independence with the valuable social learning they gained from their unusual mentor. The success story of Luna and Echo spread beyond scientific circles, capturing public imagination. Their journey from traumatized orphans to confident young bears, guided by an extraordinary mentor, became a powerful symbol of resilience and adaptation. Local schools organized field trips to observe the unusual family, while artists and writers found inspiration in their story. One crisp morning, as Sophie conducted her regular observations, she witnessed a moment that encapsulated everything Pine Valley had discovered about wildlife rehabilitation. Atlas sat watching as Luna and Echo practiced fishing in their pond, his presence both protective and encouraging. When Luna successfully caught her first fish, Atlas vocalized what could only be described as a congratulatory rumble. The scene represented a new understanding of wildlife rehabilitation, one that recognized the complex emotional and social needs of animals in recovery. Atlas had shown that successful rehabilitation wasn't just about physical survival, but about rebuilding the social connections that make wildlife communities resilient. As winter transformed Pine Valley into a wonderland of snow and ice, the sanctuary continued its groundbreaking work. The Cubs' success story opened new possibilities for wildlife rehabilitation worldwide, challenging assumptions about what was possible when human science worked in harmony with natural instincts. Winter melted into spring, marking a full year since Sophie's first encounter with Atlas. The Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary had transformed from a local rehabilitation center into an internationally recognized institute for wildlife studies. The morning sun cast long shadows across the newly expanded grounds as Sophie made her way to a special ceremony that would mark both an ending and a beginning. Luna and Echo, now strong and independent young bears, were ready for their return to the wild. Their successful rehabilitation under Atlas's guidance had revolutionized wildlife rehabilitation practices, creating a model that sanctuaries worldwide were eager to implement. The release ceremony would be attended by researchers, conservationists, and media from around the globe. Dr. Martinez stood before the gathered crowd, her voice carrying across the morning air. What we've witnessed here goes beyond successful rehabilitation. Atlas has shown us that the capacity for emotional intelligence, teaching and social bonds in rehabilitated wildlife far exceeds our previous understanding. Today, as we prepare to return Luna and Echo to their natural habitat, we celebrate not just their journey, but a new chapter in wildlife conservation. The cubs, no longer small and frightened, moved confidently in their temporary holding area. Their physical transformation was remarkable, but it was their behavioral development that had amazed researchers. They displayed all the natural wariness and survival skills necessary for wild bears, while retaining the emotional intelligence fostered by their unique upbringing. Atlas watched from his enclosure, his massive form still and attentive. Over the past year, his mentorship of the cubs had provided unprecedented insights into the cognitive capabilities of rehabilitated predators. His gentle guidance had helped shape not just two young bears, but the future of wildlife rehabilitation itself. The release would take place in a remote area of the national forest, carefully chosen to offer the best chances for survival. As the transport teams made their final preparations, Sophie completed her last set of observations. Her detailed documentation of the cubs' development would contribute to a comprehensive study on social learning in rehabilitated wildlife. Dr. Wilson approached Sophie, carrying a thick folder of research papers. "Your work here has helped create something extraordinary," he said, handing her the folder. "The University of Montana wants to offer you early admission to their wildlife biology program. They're particularly interested in your observational methodologies." The news represented everything Sophie had dreamed of, yet her attention remained focused on Atlas. The bear who had once terrified her had become her greatest teacher, showing her the profound connections possible between humans and wildlife. His story had transformed not just her life, but the lives of countless others who would benefit from the sanctuary's groundbreaking work. As the transport vehicles departed with Luna and Echo, Atlas let out a deep, resonant call. The sound carried across the valley, a farewell that seemed to hold both pride and acceptance. The cubs responded with their own calls, creating a moment of connection that moved many observers to tears. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of plans for the sanctuary's next phase, The success with Luna and Echo had attracted substantial funding for expanded rehabilitation programs. New enclosures would be constructed, designed to facilitate the kind of social learning Atlas had demonstrated. The Atlas method would become a standard part of wildlife rehabilitation worldwide. Sophie remained at her observation post long after the crowds had departed. Atlas had returned to his regular routines, but there was a new dimension to his behavior. The bear, who had helped raise 2 orphaned cubs, had grown beyond his role as a sanctuary resident. He had become a pioneer, showing the world the true potential for understanding between species. Dr. Martinez joined Sophie at the observation deck, her expression thoughtful. "When you first arrived in Cedar Ridge, did you ever imagine finding your life's purpose in a bear's den?" she asked, with a gentle smile. Atlas has taught us all that the greatest discoveries often come from facing our fears and challenging our assumptions. The sanctuary would continue to evolve, shaped by the lessons learned from Atlas's extraordinary journey. His legacy would live on through Luna and Echo, through the countless animals who would benefit from new rehabilitation methods, and through the changed perceptions of human-wildlife relationships worldwide. As the spring day drew to a close, Sophie made her final notes. She had documented not just the rehabilitation of 2 bear cubs, but a revolution in our understanding of wildlife cognition and emotional intelligence. The story that began with a frightened girl being pushed into a bear's enclosure had grown into something that would influence wildlife conservation for generations to come. Up next, we've got 2 more incredible stories waiting for you right on your screen. If Atlas's journey touched your heart, you won't want to miss these remarkable tales of unexpected friendships and extraordinary discoveries. Just click and explore more amazing stories of wildlife connections that will leave you amazed and inspired. The magic of Cedar Ridge, Atlas, and the transformed Pine Valley Wildlife Sanctuary would continue to inspire and educate, reminding everyone that sometimes the most profound understanding comes from the most unexpected encounters. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to explore more extraordinary stories of wildlife connections that will leave you amazed and inspired.